So things have changed. You talked about Tories and Labour, that they're basically the same. One just moves to the end goal of lots of immigration faster. When did Britain lose control of its borders, and why? What's behind it? This juicing of the economy for immigration.
Mm. Well, this is the thing, right? So left-wing pundits will often say that Britain's history is the history of migration. And when they say that, they are actually right. Because if you look at our history as an island nation, it has been a series of waves of migration from various different places, primarily around Europe, but now more recently around the globe. You know, from the Roman conquest and settlement at the beginning of the first millennium, Anglo-Saxon migration, 5th and 7th centuries, Viking invasions, the Jewish settlements through the early 1100s, and 1200s, and the Huguenot refugees and so on, right up to the Windrush migrants after the war. It is true to say that the history of Britain is one of migration, and that has massively impacted the texture and identity of this country. Now, what those people seem to neglect to say is the kind of immigration that we are seeing today is absolutely unprecedented. Migration as a fact is not unprecedented. You know, it'd be ridiculous to suggest that it is. But the scale of migration and the places that the people are coming from is what is completely unprecedented. We're talking in the order of hundreds of thousands and millions. And with, last year, over half of those visas, 1.2 million, handed out to people from India, from Pakistan, from China, and Nigeria. You know, these are places that don't really have any meaningful cultural links to Britain outside of perhaps the Empire period. But in terms of cultural proximity, they are very, very different. You know, it's just a simple fact that if you observe the histories of, for example, Britain and France, there's a great deal of crossover. You know, we have a lot of shared history, shared culture, and shared people. But when you look at the history of, say, Britain and Nigeria, for instance, there's just not that same degree of similarity. And this is not about, it's not about marginalizing people or hating people. It's simply about noting that differences between groups, meaningful and consequential differences between groups, do exist, and that has an impact when those groups are grinding up against each other in certain geographical locations that are bad. You know, it's ultimately negative for the people living in these places because they feel alienated, they feel they don't belong, they feel that something they love, i.e., which is their home, has been lost or changed in a way that they don't like. And that's just not a good experience for anybody. And back to the point about me being a Zoomer, I'm 23 years old, I was born in 2001. I've never known Britain to be anything other than this. This is what a lot of people, I don't think, fully grasp, is that my parents' generation and further back, they knew the old Britain before this type of unprecedented mass migration. And they have seen the change, observed it happen, and have, a variety of opinions on the matter. But I have never known Britain as anything other than this kind of multicultural economic zone, which is it doesn't really have any real sense of identity, and is just kind of desperate to remain relevant on the world stage, desperate to, see the line go up on the GDP graph. And there's no real sense that the ruling class are prioritizing the well-being of people in Britain. It's all about these kind of abstract, kind of managerial concerns about spreadsheets and how Britain ranks on various global ranking indexes. So, and then in terms of just actually walking in the streets and seeing the change, I completely agree. I mean, over the last few years, I was at uni for 4 of them. And even when I was there in the town that I didn't live in, that I lived in, but that I wasn't from, I saw the change happen there. And it's truly quite a phenomenal sort of, it's quite an interesting phenomenon to observe, and quite sort of frightening, I think. That's ultimately my feeling about it.
Yeah, the change having been felt by your parents, for example, their generation, the generation before, it's something which, I spot when I speak to older people. But what I've noticed on X, now I had never been on Twitter until I started this podcast. And anyway, you obviously can't help but pick up on these trends that start to be appearing with regards to what people are talking about. And on X, I see lots of older Britons starting tweets with things like, I'm 66 or I'm 70 years old. And the common theme is they're lamenting the change and loss of their country and values and atmosphere. They're at pains to say it's not about race per se. It's more about that they feel betrayed and like they've lost something. And I've noticed that this feeling is never, it can never be accounted for in the statistics. So even for those people who want to, criticize immigration policy, ultimately, in the modern world, everyone says you don't have an argument unless you can throw statistics up. And when people like to talk about it in a look what it can earn us, that still doesn't account for the fact that there are vast swathes of people that might be feeling a sense of loss. And whilst the easy way out is to call those people complaining to be racist gammon, those same people who'd cast aspersions on them, I think if they were to look a bit deeper into their own guiding assumptions, they'd realize that there is something there, because the people who suggest we should celebrate all people and their cultures equally, the new arrivals' cultures should be celebrated equally so they do not have to experience a sense of loss, shows that culture matters and people are sad when it changes, and particularly that they're angry when they didn't ask for it. And I think that's the one thing you notice, right, is even amongst political commentators who might lean a bit left but are sympathetic with the anti-mass immigration rhetoric, they say, ultimately, no one's asked for this, and this is why there's this simmering resentment. What do you make of all that?
Well, there's a number of things to say here. Now, I think you're totally right to say that the sort of statistical quantitative approach to talking about mass migration fails to capture the thing that really resonates with normal people, which is just the experience of watching their homeland transform in a way that they don't like. But even with that in mind, the statistics are in our favor. I mean, the statistics all show that mass immigration is damaging to this country. For instance, a piece of research that we did recently showed that in order for migrants to break even, financially speaking, they need to be earning more than £47,000. And only 19% of migrants actually achieve this, leaving the remaining 81% as net takers from the system. So what that means, to be clear, is British taxpayer money going to migrants, right? Who are here only as a part of government policy, right? Another piece of research we put out showed that in the last 2 years, the average salary of skilled worker migrants has decreased by £10,000 down to £27,000, which again suggests the extent to which these people are contributing to the economy. That's not to mention things like homelessness. 38% of homeless people, of which there are 4,000 in Britain, are immigrants. It's ridiculous. And then we don't even need to get onto issues such as, the massive increase in crime, the massive increase in Islamic honor violence, the massive increase in, for example, sexual violence and the rape gangs in towns like Telford and Rochdale and so on. All of these things. And to address your second point there about the kind of older generations noting these changes, I am sympathetic to those older people who do look at their town, look at their community, and feel that they have lost something. But actually, in a lot of cases, it's this generation's crippling fear of being called racist or being called bigots or being called xenophobic or whatever other smear the left kind of chooses to use against them. That crippling fear that has led them to feel unable to criticize mass immigration and to let it go on for so long. That's part of the problem, right? Mm. And another thing to talk about here is the fact that the generation that we're talking about, which is basically my parents' generation, the kind of Gen X, boomers kind of area, these are the people who believed and told us and taught me when I was going through my education that the most important way to think about Britain is as being a set of values, right? I remember when I went to university, there was a mural celebrating 800 years since the Magna Carta was signed. And the values, quote unquote, that this mural celebrated, that it stated that Magna Carta was about, were diversity, equality, peace, democracy, and all the rest of it. The various sort of buzzwords, the various slogans of the regime that governs us. And actually, that's not at all what it was about. And that's not actually at all what Britain is about. Because Britain, fundamentally, being a nation of the old world, of Europe, is a nation of people and history and traditions. America, on the other hand, which is a nation of the New World, you can actually call that a nation of values because it was explicitly created at a specific moment in time with a specific constitution and set of values and project that it was fundamentally designed to pursue. And this kind of model has then been transported back to the old world and sort of imposed upon Britain to the point where we're now told that, somebody who's turned up from Africa last week, as long as they believe in gay marriage and democracy, then they're just as British as we are. I mean, it's actually a ridiculous claim when you stop to think about it, because Britain is not a nation of values. Britain is a nation of people. You only get British values when you have British people. This is what's so crucial to understand, is these things don't just appear out of the ether fully formed. These are products of thousands of years of tradition and people passing these values down, noting that they are valuable. But if you remove the people, then you inevitably lose the values, which is what we're seeing happen in real time with mass migration.